A millionaire kicked out his son for getting a waitress pregnant. But months later he was. Nathaniel Blackwood stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The city lights of Los Angeles glittering below like scattered diamonds on black velvet. His empire, Blackwood Holdings, was built from the ground up, a symbol of power, control, and absolute authority. His name was synonymous with success, whispered in boardrooms and feared in financial circles. He had spent decades ensuring his legacy would be untouchable, untainted by weakness, scandal, or foolish sentimentality. And yet, tonight, his legacy had betrayed him. The heavy oak door of his study creaked open, and the butler stepped in, his voice stiff with formality. "Sir, your son is here." Nathaniel exhaled slowly, turning away from the skyline. The name alone was enough to sour his mood. Logan Blackwood, his only son. His greatest disappointment. Logan had been given every advantage money could buy: elite education, world-class mentors, an effortless path to power within Blackwood Holdings. He was meant to be Nathaniel's heir, the next in line, the one to carry on the empire. And yet, he had thrown it all away. Nathaniel had spent years molding Logan into his image, trying to strip away the softness, the hesitation, the foolish desire to find meaning outside of success. But Logan had always been different. Too emotional, too idealistic, too unwilling to embrace the ruthlessness required to survive in their world. And now? Logan had made the worst mistake of his life. The study door opened wider, and Logan stepped in, his broad shoulders squared, his jaw set. His father's icy gaze swept over him, taking in the defiance in his eyes, the rigid tension in his stance. He had the Blackwood features, sharp cheekbones, piercing blue eyes, a confident stance, but where Nathaniel's presence was commanding and cold, Logan's was burning and untamed. "You wanted to see me?" Logan's voice was steady, but Nathaniel could hear the tension beneath it. Nathaniel let the silence stretch, his calculated gaze never leaving his son's face. He walked to his desk, his fingers grazing the polished surface before finally speaking. "I assume you know why you're here." Logan let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. "Dad, listen." Nathaniel cut him off with a single, sharp glance. "You got a waitress pregnant." The words hit the room like a gunshot. Logan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "Her name is Ava," he said firmly, his voice unwavering. "And yes, she's pregnant. We're having a baby." Nathaniel's grip tightened on the edge of his desk. A child, a Blackwood heir born from a nobody. Did his son even understand what he had done? The stain this would put on their name? The mockery their family would face in high society? "Do you even realize what this means?" Nathaniel's voice was dangerously low. "For the family? For the business? For everything I have built?" Logan's eyes did not waver. "It means I'm going to be a father." His voice held conviction, something raw and undeniable. "It means I'm going to take responsibility for my child, whether you approve or not." Nathaniel let out a cold, humorless laugh. "Responsibility?" He stepped closer, his presence towering over Logan. "Do you even understand what that word means? You were born into wealth, into privilege. You have never had to fight for anything in your life. And now you think you can just throw it all away for some woman who saw an opportunity and took it?" Logan's fists clenched. "That's not true. Ava didn't even know who I was when we met." Nathaniel's expression darkened. "Then she got lucky, because now she's carrying a child with my name." He leaned in, his voice a lethal whisper. "And whether you understand it or not, that comes with power. And a price." Logan shook his head, anger flashing in his eyes. "Not everything is about power. Dad, not everything is a business deal. Some things, real things, are built on love, not manipulation." Nathaniel's jaw tightened at the word, love. He scoffed, shaking his head. "You sound like your mother." Logan's expression hardened. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." A heavy silence fell over the room. Nathaniel turned to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and withdrew a sleek black leather folder. He placed it on the surface with slow, precise movements before looking back up at his son. "Fine." His voice was cold, absolute. "If you want to throw away your future, do it. But you will do it without my name, without my money, without anything I have given you." Logan's heart pounded in his chest. "What?" Nathaniel's lips curled into a smirk. The final blow delivered without hesitation. "I am cutting you off." The words landed like a punch, stealing Logan's breath. No more inheritance. No more Blackwood holdings. No more protection. You are no longer my son. For a brief moment, Logan faltered. He had always known his father was ruthless. But this was beyond cruelty. It was erasure. Nathaniel watched him, waiting, searching for the crack in his resolve. And for a moment, he thought he saw it: pain, hesitation, doubt. But then, Logan straightened his spine. Fine. His voice was steady, unwavering. He squared his shoulders, meeting his father's cold gaze with something Nathaniel had never seen in him before: freedom. If that's what it takes to be a real man, then I'll do it. I'll prove to you that I don't need your money. I don't need any of this to build a life of my own. Nathaniel smirked, shaking his head. We'll see how long that lasts. Logan didn't say another word. He turned on his heel and strode out of the study, his footsteps echoing down the grand hallway. Nathaniel stood motionless, staring at the door long after it had closed. This was necessary. There was no room for weakness in the Blackwood family. No room for sentimentality. And yet, as Nathaniel turned back to the towering windows, looking out over the city he ruled, for the first time in years, the view felt hollow. The Blackwood mansion had never felt so empty. Logan Blackwood gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The Los Angeles skyline faded into the distance in his rearview mirror, the city lights shrinking behind him like the last embers of a fire that had finally burned out. His father's words still rang in his ears. Cold, sharp, and absolute. You are no longer my son. He should have expected it. Should have known that defying Nathaniel Blackwood would come at a price. But no matter how many times he had imagined this moment, standing up to the man who had controlled his entire life, choosing love over power, walking away from the empire he had been groomed to inherit, he had never truly let himself believe it would happen. And yet, here he was, alone, cast out, a man without a fortune, a title, or a future, but not without purpose. Logan exhaled through his nose, forcing his breathing to steady as he pressed harder on the gas pedal. The road stretched endlessly before him, winding through the dark Texas countryside, leading him to the only thing that mattered now: Ava. She was waiting for him in a small, one-bedroom apartment in Austin, the kind of place he had never stepped foot in before. His entire life had been spent in luxury, gated mansions, penthouse suites, five-star hotels, but now, those things were nothing more than ghosts of a past he no longer belonged to. A baby. Their baby. The thought sent a mix of anxiety and fierce determination surging through his veins. He wasn't just leaving behind the Blackwood name, he was stepping into an entirely different world. One where he wasn't the heir to an empire but a man starting over from nothing. You'll come crawling back, his father had sneered as Logan walked out of the mansion for the last time. You'll fail, just like everyone else who has ever walked away from me. The memory made his jaw tighten. No, he wouldn't fail. He couldn't. Not for himself. Not for Ava. Not for the child growing inside her. By the time Logan pulled into the apartment complex, exhaustion weighed heavy in his bones. But he barely noticed. The moment he stepped out of the car, the warm Texas night air hit him, thicker, heavier than the crisp coastal air he was used to. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag over his shoulder and walked toward Ava's door. It swung open before he could knock. Ava stood in the doorway, her wide hazel eyes filled with relief, worry, and something else: unshaken trust. You made it, she whispered. Logan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I told you I would. She hesitated only a second before stepping forward, wrapping her arms around him, and burying her face in his chest. He held her tightly, letting the warmth of her body chase away the last lingering traces of cold from his father's rejection. They stood there for what felt like forever. And for the first time in hours, Logan felt something close to peace. Ava pulled back, searching his face. Did he really? Logan nodded once. He cut me off. Completely. Her brows furrowed. Are you okay? He exhaled, forcing a small, almost bitter smile. I will be. She bit her lip, her fingers tightening on his jacket. I'm so sorry. Logan. No. He shook his head. Don't be. I knew this would happen. I just didn't know how much it would hurt. But he didn't finish the sentence. He refused to give his father that power. Ava studied him, her gaze unwavering. Then she took his hand and squeezed. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out. The sheer certainty in her voice, In the way she looked at him like he wasn't broken. Like he wasn't some fallen prince with no kingdom left to claim. Made his chest ache. He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. I know. But even as the words left his lips, he realized how much he had to prove. The next morning, Logan woke up to the unfamiliar hum of the city outside Ava's apartment. The bed was small, the mattress slightly too firm. But Ava was curled up beside him, her head resting against his shoulder. And for a brief moment, he let himself forget everything except this, their baby, the future they were about to build. He pressed a kiss to her temple before slipping out of bed. By the time Ava emerged from the bedroom, Logan was in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee as if it held all the answers to his life. You're up early, she murmured, rubbing her eyes. He smirked. Figured I should get started. Ava frowned slightly, tilting her head. On what? Finding a job. Her lips parted slightly in surprise. You don't have to do that today. Logan, you just got here. But he shook his head. No, I need to start now. I need to build something for us. Ava hesitated, then reached for her phone. Then, I might have an idea. When Logan stepped into Carter's bakery, the scent of cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh bread hit him like a memory from another life. The shop was small, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, with wooden shelves lined with pastries and a long glass display case filled with neatly arranged confections. Behind the counter, a woman in her 60s eyed him with open suspicion. You the one looking for a job? Logan straightened. Yes, ma'am. She raised an eyebrow. Ever worked in a bakery before? No. She smirked. Figures. Ava nudged him. But he's a fast learner. The woman, Mrs. Carter, according to the sign on the wall, studied him for a moment before crossing her arms. You ever need dough before? City boy? Logan hesitated. Not exactly. Mrs. Carter snorted. That's what I thought. All right, show up tomorrow at 5. We'll see if you last a day. The first week was brutal. Logan's arms ached from kneading dough. His back burned from standing on his feet for hours. The early mornings and late nights blurred together. And for the first time in his life, he understood what real work felt like. But he never quit. Each day, he got a little better. The dough stopped sticking to his fingers as much. His hands learned the motions, the rhythm, the patience. The customers started recognizing him, nodding at him when they walked in. And Ava, she came by every afternoon, sitting at the corner table, watching him with quiet pride. It was nothing like the life he had left behind. But somehow, it felt more real than anything he had ever known. 2 weeks later, Logan was pulling a tray of golden cinnamon rolls out of the oven when the bakery door swung open. He turned, expecting a customer. But instead, standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, was Nathaniel Blackwood. The air in the bakery shifted. The warmth was replaced by something cold, sharp, suffocating. Logan froze. His father, the man who had disowned him, cast him out, erased him from his life, was standing in his world now. And for the first time in his life, Logan didn't feel small under his father's gaze. He wiped his flour-covered hands on his apron, squared his shoulders, and met Nathaniel's icy stare. What are you doing here? Logan's voice was steady, strong. Nathaniel's lips pressed into a thin line. I came to see if you had come to your senses. Logan chuckled, shaking his head. You didn't come to see me. You came to see if I had failed. Silence. Then, Nathaniel's gaze flickered, just for a second, to Ava. To the small swell of her stomach. Something in his expression cracked. And in that moment, Logan knew. His father wasn't the one in control anymore. He was. And for the first time, Logan felt free. The echoes of his father's voice still rang in Logan Blackwood's ears as he walked out of the Blackwood estate for the last time. His duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The night air was cold, but it was nothing compared to the icy finality of Nathaniel Blackwood's words. You are no longer my son. Logan clenched his jaw, fighting the emotions clawing at his chest. The mansion behind him, his childhood home, the place where he had learned to walk, to talk, to dream, was nothing more than a monument to power. A prison of expectations he would never live up to. Now, he was cast out, disowned, and left to fend for himself for the first time in his life. But he wasn't alone. His fingers tightened around his phone as he unlocked his car and slid into the driver's seat. He had one last message from Ava. The woman he had risked everything for. I don't care about the money. Logan, I just want you. I just want our baby to have a father. That was all he needed. With a deep breath, Logan started the engine, pulled out of the grand driveway, and drove away from the only life he had ever known. By the time he reached Austin, Texas, exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. The city was nothing like the elite world of Los Angeles he had left behind. The towering skyscrapers were replaced by modest apartment complexes. And the streets, though alive with energy, lacked the polished perfection of wealth. But here, there was something else: hope. He parked outside Ava's apartment complex, a far cry from the lavish penthouse he had once lived in. The walls were faded, the stairway rusted, the streetlights flickering. It was the kind of place Nathaniel Blackwood would have sneered at. Logan didn't care. The door opened before he even knocked. Ava stood in the dim light, her hazel eyes searching his, as if checking to make sure he was real, that he hadn't turned back, that he hadn't let fear win. Her long brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her hand rested protectively on her slightly swollen stomach. You came, she whispered, as if she had doubted it would happen. Logan exhaled, stepping forward and pulling her into his arms. He didn't just come, he had chosen her. I told you I would. She squeezed him tightly before pulling back, studying his face. Did he really? Logan nodded. He cut me off. Completely. Ava swallowed, her fingers trembling as she reached up to touch his face. I'm sorry, Logan. He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. Don't be. We're going to be okay. Ava smiled softly, but there was worry behind it. We have to figure things out. We need a plan. Logan had never needed a plan before. His father had always controlled every step, every move, but now, he had no safety net, no inheritance, no wealth to fall back on. And yet, as he looked into Ava's eyes, he knew the truth. For the first time in his life, he was free. The next morning, Logan woke up to the scent of coffee and something burning. Ava stood in the small kitchen, biting her lip as she tried to salvage a pan of charred eggs. When she saw him, she let out a nervous laugh. So, turns out cooking isn't my strong suit. Logan chuckled, stepping forward and gently taking the pan from her. Good thing I can cook. Then, Ava blinked. Wait, you can cook? He smirked. I may have grown up with private chefs, but that doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention. It wasn't much: scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee, but it was the first meal they had together in this new life. And as they sat at the tiny table, Logan felt something real for the first time. Ava set down her fork, watching him. What's next, Logan? We need money, a place to live, a job. He exhaled. I'll find something. Ava hesitated. I might know someone. There's a bakery a few blocks from here. Mrs. Carter owns it. She's always looking for help. Logan arched an eyebrow. You want me to work in a bakery? Ava smirked. Why not? You know how to cook. It wasn't what he had imagined. He had been raised to run corporations, not knead dough. But for once, Logan had no one dictating his choices. No father watching his every move. Maybe this was what he needed. His first day at Carter's bakery was a disaster. Mrs. Carter, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, took one look at him and huffed. You don't look like you've worked a day in your life, city boy. Logan gave her a tight-lipped smile. I learn fast. She handed him a lump of dough. Good, need that. It should have been simple. But the dough stuck to his fingers, refused to cooperate, and by the time he finished, Mrs. Carter was shaking her head. You're fighting it too much, she muttered. It's not about control, it's about patience. Logan scowled. Patience had never been his strong suit. By the time his shift ended, his arms ached, his back throbbed, and his clothes were dusted in flour. Yet, despite the exhaustion, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: pride. For once, his success wasn't handed to him. He was earning it. 2 weeks later, Logan was finally getting the hang of the job when the bakery door swung open. His heart stopped. Standing in the doorway, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, was Nathaniel Blackwood. The bakery, which had been filled with warmth and the scent of fresh bread, suddenly felt cold. Logan wiped his hands on his apron, squaring his shoulders. What are you doing here? Nathaniel studied him, his face unreadable. You've been busy. Logan crossed his arms. You came all this way just to see if I failed? His father's gaze flickered to Ava, to the small swell of her stomach, and for the first time, Logan saw something foreign in his father's eyes. Regret. For a second, silence stretched between them. Then, Nathaniel exhaled. You were supposed to take over the company. Logan, you were supposed to be my legacy. Logan's jaw clenched. I am not your legacy. His father's lips pressed into a thin line. You really think you can survive like this? Logan smirked. I already am. Nathaniel's eyes darkened, but there was something else there, something Logan had never seen before. Uncertainty. For the first time, his father wasn't in control. Without another word, Nathaniel turned and walked out the door. Logan let him go. For the first time in his life, he didn't need his father. He had Ava. He had their baby. And he had a future he built with his own hands. As he turned back to the bakery, the scent of cinnamon filling the air, he knew one thing for certain: he had won. The morning sun filtered through the large bakery windows, casting golden streaks across the rustic wooden floors. The warm scent of freshly baked bread and cinnamon filled the air, creating a comforting contrast to the unease curling in Logan Blackwood's stomach. Today wasn't like any other day. Today, everything could fall apart. Logan stood behind the counter, rolling up his sleeves, the flour dusting his forearms an afterthought as his mind raced. He had never felt fear like this, not when he walked away from the Blackwood fortune. Not when he started over with nothing. Not even when he held Ava's hand in that hospital room as she gave birth to their son. But now the stakes were higher than ever. Because today, his father was coming for everything. Logan had spent a lifetime under Nathaniel Blackwood's rule. His father had dictated his future, controlled his choices, and when Logan dared to choose love over money, Nathaniel had cast him out like he was nothing. And now, even after all this time, even after Logan had built a life with his own hands, his father still wasn't done punishing him. The lawsuit papers sat on the counter, taunting him. Nathaniel had pulled strings, found a loophole, and now Carter's bakery was at risk of being shut down. The very place that had given Logan a second chance, the place where he had rebuilt his life, was about to be stripped away from him. Logan? He looked up to see Ava, standing by the doorway with their baby in her arms. Little Caleb, barely a year old, blinked up at him with innocent blue eyes, the same shade as Logan's own. His son, his entire world. Ava bit her lip. Did you hear from your lawyer? Logan sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's bad. If my father pushes this through, the bakery will be forced to shut down. Ava's face hardened. He just can't let you go. Can he? Logan let out a bitter laugh. He doesn't care about the bakery. He doesn't care about me. He just wants to prove that I can't survive without him. That I'll come crawling back. Ava stepped forward, shifting Caleb in her arms before reaching for Logan's hand. That's never going to happen. You've built something real here. Logan, you fought for this life. We fought for this. He looked at her, his chest tightening. She was right. He wasn't the same man who had walked out of that mansion. He wasn't the broken son desperate for his father's approval. He was stronger now. And if Nathaniel wanted a fight, Logan would give him one. The day passed in a blur of tension and quiet determination. Logan worked harder than ever, pouring every ounce of his energy into the bakery. He refused to let the looming threat of his father take away what he had built. Regulars came in, greeting him warmly, completely unaware that this might be the last time they stepped into Carter's bakery. Mrs. Carter, the woman who had taken a chance on him when no one else would, eyed him from across the shop, her hands resting on her hips. Whatever you're brooding about, boy, stop it, she called out. You're scaring the customers. Logan managed a small smile, but it faded quickly. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was the calm before the storm. And he was right. At exactly 5 p.m., the bakery door swung open, and the air grew heavy. Nathaniel Blackwood walked in, dressed in his signature tailored suit. His father was an imposing figure. Everything about him screamed power, control, intimidation. Logan wasn't a child anymore. But standing there, facing him, he felt that familiar weight pressing down on his chest. Ava tensed beside him, clutching Caleb closer. Nathaniel's cold gaze swept over the bakery, the counters lined with pastries, the old wooden shelves, the warm lighting, everything Logan had built. Then his eyes landed on his son. You look different, Nathaniel said, his voice even, unreadable. Logan crossed his arms. You look the same. Nathaniel smirked, but there was no humor in it. So this is what you've chosen over your legacy? A bakery? Logan stood taller. "This is my legacy." His father's expression darkened. "No, Logan, you are a Blackwood, and you belong in the empire I built, not in some backstreet shop selling bread." Ava stepped forward, her voice sharp. "He belongs wherever he wants to be." Nathaniel barely spared her a glance. "I'm not here to argue. The lawsuit has already been filed. I'm giving you one last chance. Come back, reclaim your rightful place, or lose everything." Logan's fists clenched at his sides. The rage, the years of resentment, the endless battle for his father's approval, it all boiled to the surface. He took a step forward. "I would rather lose everything than live under your control again." For the first time, Nathaniel faltered. Something flashed in his eyes, something that almost looked like doubt. Logan pressed on. "You tried to break me. But you didn't. I built this life without you. Without your money, your name, your power. And I am never coming back." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. And then, for the first time in Logan's life, his father looked defeated. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. His gaze flickered to Ava, to Caleb, to the warmth of the bakery, the very thing Logan had chosen over him. Finally, in a low voice, he said, "Then I suppose this is goodbye." Logan's chest tightened, but he refused to let it show. It already was. Nathaniel turned without another word and walked out of the bakery. The moment the door swung shut, Logan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ava was at his side instantly, gripping his arm. "Logan, you did it." He exhaled, his body trembling with the weight of it all. "It's over." But before relief could settle in, Mrs. Carter stormed out of the kitchen, holding up her phone. "You might want to see this." "Boy." Logan frowned, taking the phone. His heart stopped. The news was everywhere. Breaking. Nathaniel Blackwood steps down as CEO amidst internal conflicts and public backlash. Logan blinked. "What?" Ava gasped. "He stepped down?" Mrs. Carter grinned. "Seems like someone finally realized that power ain't worth a damn when you got no one left to rule over." Logan stared at the screen, his mind racing. His father had always been untouchable, a titan in the corporate world. But now, he was just a man. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel Blackwood had lost. And Logan? Logan had won. 1 year later, Foster and Blackwood Bakery stood tall in the heart of Austin. The once small shop had expanded, bustling with customers who had followed Logan's journey, his fight, his victories, his rise from nothing. He had done it, not alone, not because of his father, but because of Ava, Caleb, and everyone who had believed in him. As he stood behind the counter, kneading dough with ease, the bell above the door chimed. He looked up, expecting a customer. Instead, he saw his mother, Eleanor Blackwood, the only person from his old life who had never truly abandoned him. Stood in the doorway, tears in her eyes. "You built something beautiful, Logan," she whispered. Logan smiled. He had, and for the first time, he was truly free. If you believe in Logan's journey, show your support. Glowing star. Like this story if you're proud of him. Comment below. Would you have made the same choice as Logan? And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories. Let's celebrate those who choose love over power and freedom over control. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm cinnamon rolls filled the air inside Foster and Blackwood Bakery. The little shop Logan Blackwood had built from nothing. The bakery had become more than just a business, it was a sanctuary. A testament to his resilience. A place where he had finally learned what it meant to build something with his own 2 hands. But today, even as customers came and went, exchanging warm greetings and filling the space with laughter, Logan couldn't shake the weight pressing down on his chest. Something was coming, and it wasn't just any day. Today marked 5 years since he walked away from his father's empire. From the mansion he grew up in, from the life that had been planned for him since birth. It had been 5 years since Nathaniel Blackwood, his ruthless and powerful father, had disowned him. 5 years since Logan had left everything behind, his inheritance, his fortune, the cold walls of his father's corporate kingdom, to choose love over power. 5 years, and still, his past had a way of creeping back in. As he wiped his hands on his apron, his eyes drifted toward the clock. 4:45 p.m. 15 minutes. 15 minutes until the man who had once abandoned him would walk through that door. It had started with a phone call. A number Logan never expected to see on his screen again. His mother, Eleanor Blackwood, had always been the quiet force in his life. The woman who tried, and failed, to soften the edges of his father's world. She had stayed, even when Logan walked away. She had watched as Nathaniel Blackwood cut his only son out of his life, choosing his business over his family. But now, after all this time, she had called him. "Logan," she had said, her voice unsteady. "Your father wants to see you." Logan had nearly laughed. Nathaniel Blackwood never wanted anything, he demanded. "Why?" Logan had asked, his fingers tightening around the phone. A pause. "He's not the same man you knew," his mother had whispered. "Please, Logan, just give him a chance." Give him a chance? Where was that chance 5 years ago? When Logan had stood in his father's office, begging him to understand why he couldn't marry for business. Why he couldn't turn his back on Ava, the woman he loved? Where was that chance when Nathaniel had looked him in the eye and said, "If you leave, you are no longer my son"? Logan had built his life without him. Without the Blackwood name. He owed his father nothing. And yet, here he was, waiting. The bell above the door chimed. Logan looked up just in time to see the man who had once shaped his life, and then shattered it, step inside. Nathaniel Blackwood. The years had changed him. The once imposing titan of industry looked smaller. His sharp suit unable to hide the weight he carried in his expression. His hair, once jet black and meticulously styled, now had streaks of gray. And his proud stance seemed different. Less like a man who ruled an empire. More like a man who had lost one. The bakery fell silent. Mrs. Carter, the bakery's namesake, the woman who had taken Logan in when he had nowhere else to go, stood near the back, arms crossed. Customers paused mid-conversation, sensing the tension. Ava, who had been helping at the register, stilled, her eyes narrowing. Logan set down the loaf of bread he had been shaping. "You actually came," he said, his voice even. Nathaniel exhaled, stepping forward. "I didn't think you'd agree to see me. I almost didn't." A silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of years lost, of words left unsaid. Nathaniel looked around, his gaze sweeping over the bakery. "You built this," he murmured. Logan clenched his jaw. "Yes, I did. Without you. Without your name. Without your money." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "It's impressive." A flicker of something dark passed through Logan's chest. He didn't want approval. Not now. Not after everything. "Why are you here?" Logan asked, his voice sharp. "What do you want, Dad?" Nathaniel flinched, not at the words themselves, but at the way Logan said them. Like they were foreign. Like calling him Dad no longer felt natural. "I made mistakes," Nathaniel said at last. "More than I can count." Logan folded his arms. "That's putting it lightly." Nathaniel exhaled, glancing down as if searching for the right words. "For a long time, I thought I was protecting you. That I was giving you the life you deserved. But I see now, I only pushed you away." Logan's throat tightened. "You didn't just push me away. You threw me away." The words hit like a punch to the gut. But Nathaniel didn't deny it. Instead, for the first time in his life, he looked remorseful. "Your mother told me about your son," Nathaniel said quietly. His eyes flickered toward Ava, who stood protectively near the register. "I'd like to meet him." Ava stiffened. "So did Logan." "You don't get to do that," Logan said, his voice dangerously low. "You don't get to ignore my existence for 5 years and then waltz in and ask to meet my son like nothing happened." Nathaniel's gaze darkened with something Logan had never seen in him before. "Pain. I know," he said softly, "and if I were you, I wouldn't forgive me either." Logan stared at him, his pulse pounding. For years, he had wanted this moment, this confrontation, this chance to throw everything back in his father's face, to make him feel the pain he had caused. But now that it was here, Logan didn't know what to do with it. Ava stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Caleb isn't just some business deal you can negotiate. Mr. Blackwood, if you want to be in his life, you have to earn that." Nathaniel nodded, his expression raw. "I know." Another silence. And then, in a voice that was almost too soft to hear, he said, "I just wanted to see my son." Logan's chest tightened. His father, the man who had once controlled everything, who had made entire corporations bend to his will, was standing in his bakery, asking for a second chance. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel Blackwood wasn't giving orders. He was asking. Logan exhaled slowly. "I don't know if I can forgive you." Nathaniel met his gaze. I don't expect you to. But I'm here, and I'll keep coming back. If you'll let me. Logan swallowed hard. Maybe, just maybe, people could change. The warm scent of freshly baked bread and cinnamon filled the small bakery as the morning sun cast golden rays through the large windows. Foster and Blackwood Bakery had become more than just a shop. It was a place of healing, of second chances, of love. And yet, today, as Logan Blackwood stood behind the counter, kneading dough with practiced hands, his heart felt heavier than it ever had before. Because today, he wasn't just baking bread. He was preparing for the hardest goodbye of his life. The phone had rung late last night, cutting through the quiet hum of the city beyond their apartment. Ava had been beside him, curled up on the couch with Caleb, their son, fast asleep in her arms. When Logan saw the number on the screen, his heart clenched. He hadn't spoken to his father in months, not since their tentative reunion at the bakery, where Nathaniel Blackwood, the once ruthless businessman, had stood before him, stripped of his power, asking for a second chance. Logan had kept his distance, unsure if he could ever forgive the man who had once disowned him. And now, hello? Logan's voice was cautious, laced with unspoken hesitation. It wasn't Nathaniel who answered. Logan. His mother's voice was quiet, almost fragile. It's your father. He's not doing well. The room tilted beneath him. Logan sat up straighter, gripping the phone tightly. What do you mean? Eleanor hesitated before whispering. He's sick, and the doctors, they don't think he has much time. The words sliced through him like a blade. Nathaniel Blackwood, the man who had once seemed indestructible, untouchable, unbreakable, was dying. Logan didn't sleep that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts a storm of emotions he couldn't contain. A part of him still carried the wounds his father had inflicted. The betrayal, the abandonment, the years of silence. But another part remembered the way Nathaniel had looked at him in the bakery that day. Not as a businessman, not as a father demanding obedience, but as a man who had lost his son, and was desperate to find him again. Are you going? Ava's voice was soft in the darkness. Logan turned, his gaze meeting hers. Ava had always seen through him, even when he couldn't see through himself. I don't know, he admitted, his voice raw. What if it's too late? Ava reached for his hand, her fingers lacing through his. Maybe it is, but maybe it's not. Logan stood at the entrance to his father's hospital room, his heart hammering against his ribs. Nathaniel looked small, the powerful man who had once towered over boardrooms, who had ruled his world with an iron grip, now lay in a sterile bed, his skin pale, his body frail. Eleanor sat beside him, her hand gently resting on his, whispering something only he could hear. When she looked up and saw Logan, tears welled in her eyes. You came, she whispered, standing and stepping aside. Logan swallowed, his throat burning. Nathaniel's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, there was no recognition, just exhaustion, just pain. Then, Logan, his father's voice was weak, but the relief in it was unmistakable. Logan took a slow, hesitant step forward. Hey, Dad. The words felt foreign, but they felt right. Nathaniel's lips trembled as he exhaled, as if those two words had given him something he hadn't known he needed. You, he coughed, his body racked with weakness. You actually came. Logan nodded, forcing back the storm of emotions threatening to consume him. Yeah, I did. His father closed his eyes briefly, his hand twitching against the blanket. I thought, Nathaniel's voice cracked, I thought I'd never see you again. Logan swallowed hard. Neither of them had ever been good at emotions, at apologies, at saying the things that truly mattered. But now, there was no more time for pride. I almost didn't come, Logan admitted, his voice thick. I was still angry. I still don't know how to forgive you. Nathaniel nodded weakly, as if he already knew that. You don't have to, he whispered. I just wanted to see you. One last time. Logan felt his heart break. This was it. This was the last time. For hours, Logan sat beside his father's bed, listening as Nathaniel spoke, not as a businessman, not as the ruthless mogul he had once been, but as a man, as a father, as someone who regretted every single moment he had lost. I thought power was everything, Nathaniel murmured, his gaze distant. I thought if I built something great, I could control everything, but I was wrong. He turned to Logan, his voice barely a whisper. I lost the one thing that actually mattered. Logan's throat tightened. You were always enough, Logan, even when I made you feel like you weren't. A single tear slipped down Logan's cheek before he could stop it. Why did you wait so long to say that? His voice broke. Nathaniel's gaze softened. Because I was too proud. Too stupid. Too afraid. A long silence stretched between them. Then, for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Blackwood reached for his son's hand. Logan hesitated. Then, he took it. And in that moment, all the years of hurt, of anger, of silence, faded away. Nathaniel Blackwood passed away 2 days later. The funeral was quiet, private, just family, just those who had truly known him, not the empire, not the billionaire, but the man. As Logan stood by the grave, watching the casket lower into the earth, he felt something shift inside him. The father he had once hated had died as a man he could finally forgive. Not because Nathaniel had earned it, but because Logan refused to carry that pain anymore. Because holding on to anger only kept him chained to a past he no longer wanted to live in. Ava stood beside him, her fingers tightening around his. Caleb, their son, barely 3 years old, held onto his father's leg, too young to understand but old enough to feel the weight in the air. Logan crouched, picking him up, holding him close, and as he whispered to his son, he made a promise. I'll always choose you, Caleb, because now, he knew what it meant to be a father. And he would never make the same mistakes. The bakery was warm with the scent of cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh bread. The morning rush had just ended, leaving behind the quiet hum of conversation from a few lingering customers. Foster and Blackwood Bakery had become a haven for Logan Blackwood, a place where he had built a life of his own, a life far removed from the cold, calculated world of his father. But as Logan wiped down the counter, something felt off. A strange unease settled in his chest, like a shadow creeping at the edges of his peace. And then the bell above the door chimed. At first, he didn't look up. Customers came and went all day, and he had a tray of pastries to arrange. But then, he heard the voice, a voice he hadn't heard in nearly 3 years. Logan. His hands froze over the tray. His heart stopped. Slowly, he looked up, and there, standing in the entrance of the bakery, was his mother. Eleanor Blackwood, the woman who had once stood between him and his father. The woman who had watched in silence as Joseph Blackwood had thrown him out. The woman who had finally chosen to break free, to help him destroy the empire built on lies. And yet, for all the history between them, for all the scars that still lingered, Logan hadn't seen her since the funeral. Since the day they buried Joseph Blackwood. He swallowed hard, gripping the counter, his emotions a tangled mess of anger, longing, and confusion. Mom. Eleanor smiled softly, but there was something nervous in the way she stepped forward, her hands twisting in front of her like she wasn't sure if she should be here. It's been a while, she said quietly. Logan let out a breathless chuckle, shaking his head. That's one way to put it. Ava, who had been behind the register, froze mid-motion, her eyes flicking between them. She had met Eleanor before, briefly, during the chaos of Joseph's downfall. But she knew, better than anyone, how complicated this was. Would you like some coffee? Ava asked gently, breaking the tension. Eleanor hesitated before nodding. Yes, please. Logan wiped his hands on his apron and gestured toward a corner booth. Sit, I'll bring it to you. He needed a second, just 1 second to breathe, to gather himself before facing whatever this was. Because he knew, deep down, this wasn't just a social visit. When Logan finally sat across from her, setting down a cup of steaming coffee, Eleanor reached for it with slightly shaking hands. He noticed the fine lines around her eyes, the way her once perfectly polished nails were now bare, the way her hair, always done up in elegant styles, was now simply let down. For the first time, she didn't look like a Blackwood. She just looked like his mother. You look good, she said, wrapping her hands around the cup. Happy. Logan exhaled. I am. A pause. I'm sorry, Eleanor whispered. Logan frowned, unsure what she was apologizing for. For being here? For the years she stood silent? For leaving him alone when he needed her the most? For what? He asked, his voice quieter than he intended. She met his gaze, her own eyes glassy. For everything. For not standing up to your father sooner. For not leaving when I should have. For letting you think that I didn't love you enough to fight for you. Logan's chest ached. He didn't know how to process those words. For so long, he had made peace with the fact that his mother had chosen Joseph over him. That she had stayed, even after her son had been disowned. That she had only finally broken away when it was too late. And yet, hearing her say it, hearing her regret it, made something crack open inside him. I don't know if I can forgive that, Logan admitted. Eleanor nodded, as if she had already accepted that answer. I wouldn't expect you to, she said softly. I just needed you to know that I regret it. Every single day. They sat in silence for a long time. Logan watched the steam rise from her coffee. Watched the way her fingers tightened around the cup like it was the only thing holding her together. He could feel it, the weight of something unspoken. She wasn't just here to say sorry. There was something else, something bigger. Mom. Logan leaned forward, his voice firm. Why are you really here? Eleanor swallowed hard, setting the cup down, her hands now clasped together tightly. And then, she said the words that changed everything. I found your brother. The air was sucked from Logan's lungs. His brother? His brother. The brother he never knew he had. The brother Joseph had hidden from him. Logan stared at her, unblinking, his mind reeling. You, his voice cracked. You're lying. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I wish I were. Logan felt sick. A brother? All these years. And his father had kept something like that from him? He shot up from his seat, pacing beside the table, his breath uneven. Why didn't you ever tell me? Eleanor wiped at her eyes. Because I didn't know. Logan, Joseph kept it from me, too. I only found out after he was gone. When I started going through his old files, trying to understand the things he never told me. I found him. Logan ran a hand through his hair, his heart pounding. Where is he? He demanded. Eleanor hesitated. Mom. Logan's voice broke. Where is he? A long, painful silence. Then, a name. Elliot. Logan clenched his jaw. And he doesn't know about me. Does he? Eleanor shook her head. No, he has no idea. Logan stood by the bakery window that night, staring at the empty street, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. A brother. He had a brother. Somewhere out there, there was someone with the same blood in his veins. Someone who had been kept in the dark just like him. And now, Logan had to make a choice. Did he reach out? Did he take the risk of opening another door that had been slammed shut by Joseph Blackwood? Ava walked up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist, resting her head against his back. You okay? She asked gently. Logan let out a slow breath. I don't know. Ava squeezed him tighter. Whatever you decide, I'll be here. Logan turned, meeting her eyes. And for the first time, he said the words he hadn't been ready to admit. I think I want to find him. Ava smiled softly. Then let's find him. The weight of the revelation sat heavy in Logan Blackwood's chest, pressing down on him like a burden he never knew he carried. A brother. He had a brother. For years, he had believed he was alone. That he was the last of the Blackwood name who wanted nothing to do with the legacy Joseph Blackwood had built on power, corruption, and fear. But now, standing in the dimly lit kitchen of Foster and Blackwood Bakery, the words his mother had spoken just hours ago echoed in his mind. I found your brother. Logan gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white, his stomach churned with emotions he couldn't quite name: anger, confusion, fear, and beneath it all, hope. A hope that terrified him. Because if he had a brother, it meant there was someone out there who might understand. Someone who had lived through the same pain, the same manipulation, the same absence of love that Logan had endured under their father's rule. But there was also the terrifying possibility that Elliot, his brother, wanted nothing to do with him. That thought nearly crushed him. Ava watched him from the doorway, her arms crossed as she leaned against the frame. She had given him space to process. But now, she stepped closer, her voice gentle. You're going to meet him, aren't you? Logan looked up, his throat tight. I have to. Ava nodded, as if she already knew. She always knew. I'll come with you, she said softly. You don't have to do this alone. Logan swallowed hard. He wasn't used to people standing by him, choosing to stay, choosing to walk with him through things like this. But Ava had always been different. He nodded. And just like that, the decision was made. Tomorrow, he would find Elliot. Logan had spent the entire night tossing and turning, imagining what Elliot might be like. Would he look like him? Would he have the same sharp blue eyes their father had passed down? Would he be as broken as Logan had once been? Would he even care? By morning, exhaustion clung to him, but he pushed past it. With Ava at his side, he drove 2 hours to a small, quiet town where Elliot lived, a town that was nothing like the world Logan had come from. Here, there were no towering skyscrapers, no private drivers or endless security guards. Just small businesses, family homes, and streets lined with old oak trees. A life their father had never wanted for Logan. A life their father had denied Elliot entirely. Logan parked the car outside a modest auto shop, staring at the name painted in bold letters on the garage's sign. Elliot Grayson's Auto Repair, not Blackwood. He had changed his name. Logan's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. His heart pounded, his pulse drumming in his ears. He hadn't realized how badly he wanted this, how much it mattered until he was here, staring at the proof that his brother had built a life separate from their father. Ava touched his arm, grounding him. Ready? Logan exhaled and nodded. Together, they stepped inside. The shop smelled of motor oil and fresh coffee. A radio played classic rock from somewhere in the back, and the sound of tools clinking against metal echoed through the space. And then, he saw him. Elliot. The resemblance was undeniable. The same sharp features, the same piercing blue eyes, but where Logan had spent years hiding behind expensive suits and carefully crafted control. Elliot was relaxed, his jeans stained with grease, his work boots worn from years of labor. He looked free. Logan envied that. Elliot glanced up, wiping his hands on a rag. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes flickered with something: curiosity, confusion, recognition. Can I help you? Logan's throat was dry. He struggled to find words. This was it. Everything in his life had led to this moment. Ava nudged him gently, her silent way of saying, "Say something." Logan cleared his throat. "My name is Logan," he said finally, his voice steadier than he felt. Logan Blackwood. Elliot's expression froze. Something shattered behind his eyes. For a long, excruciating moment, he just stared. Then, he took a step back, his jaw clenching. Blackwood? His voice was sharp, filled with something Logan couldn't quite place: pain. Logan nodded. No. Elliot shook his head, tossing the rag aside. "You need to leave." The words hit harder than Logan expected. His heart dropped. "I just want to talk," Logan said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Elliot let out a short, bitter laugh. "Talk? You think I want to talk to someone with that name? Do you have any idea what your father did to me? To my mom?" Logan stiffened. "He wasn't my father either." Elliot's jaw tensed. "Then why the hell are you here?" Logan exhaled shakily. "Because you're my brother." The silence that followed was painful. Ava stepped forward. "Elliot, please, just hear him out." Elliot's eyes darted between them. Guarded, uncertain. Finally, he let out a sharp breath and ran a hand through his hair. 5 minutes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Elliot led them to a small office in the back of the shop. It was cluttered with papers, coffee cups, and an old picture frame turned face down on the desk. Logan's chest tightened. He had a feeling he knew what was in that frame. They sat, but Elliot remained standing, his arms crossed. His walls were high, impenetrable. "So," he prompted, "say what you need to say." Logan inhaled deeply. "I didn't know about you. Not until last night. Our father," he grimaced at the word. "He kept you a secret from me. He cut you out of his life. Just like he tried to do to me." Elliot scoffed. "Tried? So, what? You're the golden son who made it out okay?" Logan's jaw clenched. "No, I walked away from him. And when he tried to ruin my life, I fought back. I exposed everything he had done. He lost everything." Elliot's eyes narrowed. "You took him down?" Logan nodded. Elliot exhaled slowly, his posture shifting slightly. "Good." The single word carried years of pain, of resentment, of relief. For the first time, Logan saw something in his brother's eyes that wasn't just anger. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them. Logan leaned forward, his voice raw. "I don't expect anything from you. I don't expect you to forgive me just because we share blood. But I wanted to find you because I needed to know you were okay. I needed to know that," he swallowed hard, "that I wasn't alone." Elliot's breath hitched. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, Elliot sat down. And just like that, The walls cracked. They talked for hours. About their childhoods. About what it meant to grow up without a father. Yet still feel his shadow looming over them. They weren't whole yet. They might never be. But for the first time, Logan didn't feel like he was walking alone. And neither did Elliot. The morning sun streamed through the wide windows of Foster and Blackwood Bakery, casting a warm glow over the freshly baked pastries lined up neatly in the display case. The scent of cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh bread filled the air, a scent that had come to symbolize home in a way Logan Blackwood never thought possible. A year ago, he had walked away from the world he once knew, the cold, calculating world his father, Joseph Blackwood, had built with power and control. He had left behind the fortune, the empire, the name that had defined him for years. He had fought to break free. But he had never expected what he would find on the other side. A brother, Elliot Grayson, his brother by blood, but a stranger in every other way, had been the missing piece of a life Logan had never known he needed. Their first meeting had been tense, filled with old wounds, unspoken grief, and the weight of their father's sins pressing down on them both. But something had changed in that tiny auto shop. Something had begun. And now, months later, Elliot stood behind the counter of the bakery, wiping his hands on a towel as he grinned at Logan. "You know," Elliot said, leaning against the counter, "if you had told me a year ago that I'd be working in a bakery with my long-lost brother, I would have called you insane." Logan chuckled, shaking his head as he stacked freshly baked loaves onto the shelves. "Yeah? Try telling that to the guy who thought he'd be running a billion-dollar corporation by now." Elliot smirked. "Good thing we both suck at following expectations." Logan paused, looking around the bakery, the place he and Ava had built from the ground up. A place that had started as a dream, an escape, but had become something real. A future. "You regret it?" Elliot asked, his voice softer now. Logan turned to him, meeting his gaze. Did he regret it? Walking away from the money? From the power? From the name that had once ruled his entire existence? No, not even for a second. He exhaled, shaking his head. Not even a little. Elliot studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good. For months, their relationship had been a careful balance, two men learning to be brothers after years of living completely separate lives. There were still moments of hesitation, still old wounds that hadn't fully healed. But now, there was something stronger than their past between them. A bond. Elliot clapped a hand on Logan's shoulder. "So, boss, what's next?" Logan laughed. "For the bakery? More customers. For us?" He glanced at Elliot. "I guess we just keep moving forward." Elliot nodded, as if accepting that answer, not just for today, but for every day that came after. Because moving forward was all they could do. The day passed in a blur of laughter, work, and the comforting rhythm of baking. Customers came and went, each one bringing with them the warmth of familiarity, the kind of community Logan had never known existed before he left his father's world behind. But as evening fell and the bakery quieted, Logan felt it, a presence, a shadow from his past. He turned toward the front door just as the bell chimed, and his body went rigid. Joseph Blackwood, the man who had built an empire, the man who had tried to control him, the man who had once said, "You are no longer my son." Logan's hands curled into fists at his sides, every muscle in his body tensing. Elliot, who had been cleaning the counter, looked up, and when he saw the man standing in the doorway, his face darkened. "What the hell are you doing here?" Elliot's voice was cold, sharp as a knife. Joseph took a slow step inside, his sharp blue eyes, so much like Logan's, sweeping over the bakery with quiet calculation. He looked older than Logan remembered, weaker, alone. "I came to talk," Joseph said, his voice even. Elliot scoffed. "You don't get to just show up and expect us to listen." Logan held up a hand, stopping Elliot before things escalated. It wasn't anger that filled him anymore. Not resentment, just clarity. Because this man no longer had power over him. Logan exhaled slowly. "You're here because you lost everything," he said quietly, meeting his father's gaze head on. "Not just the company, but the control, the people who used to fear you, the money that kept you untouchable. Now you have nothing, and you think you can come back here and do what? Rebuild?" Joseph's jaw tightened. "You're still my son, Logan." "No," Logan said, shaking his head. "I stopped being your son the moment you chose power over family." A flicker of something? Pain? crossed Joseph's face. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He turned his gaze to Elliot, studying him for a long moment. "I never wanted this for you," Joseph murmured. Elliot let out a bitter laugh. "You never wanted me at all." Silence hung between them. Joseph let out a slow breath, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. He placed it on the counter. "Read it," he said simply. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door. Logan and Elliot stood in silence, staring at the letter. After a long moment, Elliot huffed. "Think it's some heartfelt apology?" Logan smirked. "Not a chance." Elliot picked it up, then, without hesitation, tossed it into the trash. And just like that, Joseph Blackwood was truly gone. That night, Logan sat on the rooftop of the bakery, staring up at the stars. Ava joined him, curling up beside him with a cup of tea. "You okay?" she asked gently. Logan exhaled. "Yeah, I am." She smiled. "It's over." Logan nodded. It was. For years, he had let his father's shadow control him, dictate his future. But now he had chosen his own path. Elliot was here. Ava was here. Their family was here. And that was enough. Ava nudged him. "What do you think the moral of your story is?" Logan thought for a moment, then smirked. "That money and power mean nothing if you lose the people who matter most." Ava smiled. "That's a good one." He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close as they looked out over the quiet town that had become their home. The past was behind them. The future was theirs to build. And Logan Blackwood, once a man who had everything but felt empty, was finally truly free. Family isn't about blood, it's about the people who stand by you. No matter what, no amount of wealth can replace love, trust, and true connection. Walking away from a toxic past isn't weakness, it's courage. You are more than where you came from. Your story is yours to write. Comment below. What did you think of Logan's journey? Do you think he and Elliot made the right choice? Like this story if you believe in second chances, new beginnings, and the power of choosing your own path. Subscribe for more inspiring, emotional stories that remind us that we are stronger than our past. And remember, your story isn't over yet. Keep moving forward. Keep believing. Your best chapter is still ahead.